The first crack of thunder rolled across the Pennsylvania countryside like God's own bowling ball, sending Samuel Yoder's chickens scurrying toward their coop in a flurry of feathers and panicked clucking. Samuel straightened his aching back from where he'd been mending a section of fence, his weathered hands gripping the wooden post as he studied the darkening sky with the practiced eye of a man who'd spent 50 years reading nature's moods. "Storm's coming in fast," he muttered to himself, a habit he'd developed since Martha passed. The silence on the farm had grown so thick over the years that even his own voice sounded foreign when he bothered to use it. Samuel gathered his tools with the efficient movements of someone who'd performed the same routine 1,000 times before. Hammer in the leather tool belt, extra nails in his pocket, fence wire coiled neat and tight. Everything in its place, just like Martha used to insist. Even after 5 years, he couldn't bring himself to change the small rituals that kept her memory alive. The wind picked up, bending the tall grass in waves across his 40-acre property. In the distance he could see his neighbors, the Millers, rushing to bring in their laundry from the line. Young Jacob Miller waved from across the field, and Samuel raised his hand in acknowledgement, though he didn't smile. Smiling had become as foreign to him as laughter. As he made his way toward the barn, Samuel's eyes automatically drifted to the small white cross, barely visible through the oak trees at the far end of his property. Martha and Rebecca rested there, in the family plot his grandfather had established over a century ago. For 5 years, Samuel had visited that spot every morning after his chores and every evening before supper. Today, with the storm approaching, he'd have to break that routine. The first fat raindrops began to fall. As Samuel reached the barn door, he slid them open with a groan, both from himself and the old wooden tracks, and stepped into the familiar darkness. The barn smelled of hay, old wood, and the lingering scent of the horses he'd sold off 3 years ago when the work became too much for one man to handle. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the barn's interior for a split second. In that brief moment, Samuel could have sworn he saw movement near the back corner where he stored the old farm equipment. He paused, listening, but heard only the rain beginning to drum against the metal roof. "Probably just a barn cat," he said aloud, though he hadn't seen one around in months. Most of the strays had wandered off to the Miller farm, where the children would slip them scraps and Mrs. Miller would eventually give in and let them stay. Samuel made his way to the workbench along the east wall, hanging his tools on their designated hooks. Martha had painted small outlines around each tool's spot, claiming it would help him stay organized. He'd laughed then, telling her he wasn't so old, that he needed pictures to remember where things belonged. Now, those faded paint outlines were another precious remnant of her presence. Thunder crashed overhead, much closer this time, and Samuel heard something that made him freeze. It was soft, barely audible over the storm, but unmistakably human. A sharp intake of breath, the kind someone makes when they're trying very hard not to make any sound at all. Samuel's heart began to pound, not from fear but from the sudden break in his solitary routine. In 5 years, no one had set foot in his barn without permission. The Amish community respected his grief and his need for space, and the English neighbors knew better than to trespass on Amish property. Another lightning flash, and this time Samuel was looking in the right direction. Huddled behind his old plow, pressed against the far wall like a small animal trying to disappear, was a child. Samuel blinked hard, wondering if his eyes were playing tricks on him. It wouldn't be the first time his grief had conjured images of children where none existed. But when the next flash came, she was still there, a girl with long dark hair plastered to her head from the rain, wearing clothes that were far too thin for the weather. "Child?" Samuel called out, his voice rusty from disuse. "Child, I can see you there. You don't need to hide." The girl pressed herself further against the wall. If such a thing were possible, Samuel could hear her breathing now, quick and shallow with fear. He took a step forward, then thought better of it. Frightened children were like frightened animals. Sudden movements would only make them bolt. Instead, Samuel slowly lowered himself onto an upturned feed bucket, making himself smaller and less threatening. "My name is Samuel," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "Samuel Yoder. This is my barn, and you're welcome to shelter here from the storm. I won't hurt you." The rain was coming down in earnest now, drumming against the roof so loudly that Samuel had to raise his voice to be heard. "You must be cold and wet. Would you like a blanket? I have some old horse blankets that are clean." A small voice, barely a whisper, drifted from the corner. "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers." Samuel's heart clenched. The voice was so young, so scared. "That's very wise," he said. "Your parents taught you well. Are they looking for you? Should I help you get home to them?" Silence stretched between them, filled only by the storm's fury. When the girl finally spoke again, her voice was even smaller than before. "I don't have parents anymore." Those 5 words hit Samuel like a physical blow. He knew that particular flavor of loss, the hollow ache that came with being alone in the world. "I'm sorry to hear that, child. That's a heavy burden for someone so young." Another long pause then. "Are you going to call the police?" Samuel considered this carefully. In the English world, finding an unaccompanied child would indeed mean calling the authorities. But something in the girl's voice, a deep, bone-tired weariness that no 12-year-old should possess, made him hesitate. "Why don't you come out where I can see you properly first?" he said. "Then we can talk about what's best to do. I promise you're safe here." Lightning flashed again, and in that stark white light, Samuel saw the girl's face clearly for the first time. She had large, dark eyes that seemed to hold too much knowledge for her age, and a thin face that spoke of too many missed meals. But it was something else that made Samuel's breath catch in his throat, something familiar about the shape of her features, the way she held her head. The girl seemed to be studying him just as intently. Slowly, carefully, she emerged from behind the plow. She couldn't have been more than 12 years old, but she moved with the cautious grace of someone who'd learned that survival depended on reading people quickly and accurately. She was soaked through, her long dark hair dripping water onto the barn floor. Her clothes a thin cotton dress that might have once been blue and a torn cardigan that provided little warmth clung to her small frame. She was barefoot, Samuel noticed, and her feet were cut and dirty. "Sweet Jesus," Samuel whispered, forgetting himself. "Child, how long have you been out in this weather?" The girl wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "I don't know. Since this morning, I think. Maybe yesterday." The days kind of blur together. Samuel's mind raced. This wasn't a child who'd gotten lost playing in the woods, or wandered away from a family picnic. This was a girl who'd been surviving on her own, possibly for days. Without thinking, Samuel stood and walked to an old trunk near the workbench. The girl tensed, ready to run, but relaxed slightly when she saw him pull out a faded quilt, one of Martha's made in the traditional Amish pattern of simple geometric shapes in deep blues and browns. "Here," he said, approaching slowly with the quilt extended. "This will warm you up." The girl hesitated for a moment, then reached out and took the quilt. As their fingers brushed briefly, Samuel noticed how cold her skin was. She wrapped the quilt around herself gratefully, and some of the tension left her thin shoulders. "What's your name, child?" Samuel asked gently. "Emma," she said after a moment. Emma Wilson." The slight pause before her last name didn't escape Samuel's notice, but he didn't comment on it. Instead, he nodded as if she'd given him the most natural answer in the world. "Well, Emma Wilson, you're welcome to stay in my barn until this storm passes. But I think you need more than shelter. When did you last eat something?" Emma's stomach chose that moment to growl loudly, answering the question for her. She looked embarrassed, pressing a hand to her middle. Samuel almost smiled. Almost. It would have been his first genuine smile in years. "I have some bread and butter in the house. Maybe some leftover chicken and dumplings from yesterday. Would you like me to bring you something?" Emma's eyes lit up at the mention of food, but then weariness crept back in. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." It was a fair question, and Samuel found himself struggling for an answer. Why was he helping her? His first instinct should have been to contact the authorities, to turn this problem over to people better equipped to handle it. Instead, he found himself wanting to feed her, to make sure she was warm and safe. Maybe it was because he recognized something in her eyes, the same hollow ache that looked back at him from the mirror every morning. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in 5 years, his empty house might serve a purpose beyond simply existing. I suppose, Samuel said slowly, it's because I know what it's like to be alone, and no child should have to face that without at least a warm meal and a dry place to sleep. Emma studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slightly. I'd like that, she said quietly. Thank you. Samuel stood, his joints protesting after sitting on the hard bucket for so long. I'll go get some food. Will you be all right here for a few minutes? The storm should pass soon. Emma nodded, clutching Martha's quilt tighter around her shoulders. As Samuel turned to leave, she called after him. Mr. Yoder? He turned back. Just Samuel is fine. Thank you for not making me leave right away. Most people would have. Something in her voice suggested she was speaking from experience. Samuel felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he'd had whenever Rebecca would thank him for small kindnesses that should have been a given. Everyone deserves shelter from the storm, Emma, he said. I'll be back shortly. As Samuel stepped out into the rain, pulling his hat down low against the wind, he couldn't shake the feeling that this night was going to change everything. For 5 years, he'd lived in carefully maintained isolation, existing rather than truly living. Now, with a frightened child in his barn, and questions multiplying in his mind like raindrops, Samuel felt something he'd almost forgotten. Behind him, in the warm darkness of the barn, Emma Wilson pulled Martha's quilt closer and allowed herself the luxury of hoping that maybe she'd finally found somewhere safe to rest. But neither Samuel nor Emma could have imagined the truth that would soon connect them in ways that would transform both their lives forever. Some storms, after all, don't just bring rain. They wash away old secrets and reveal truths that have been buried for far too long. The thunder rolled on, but for the first time in years, Samuel Yoder wasn't listening to it alone. The rain had softened to a gentle patter by the time Samuel returned to the barn, carrying a wooden tray laden with food. It moved through his kitchen like a man waking from a long sleep, finding himself actually considering what might appeal to a hungry child, rather than simply grabbing whatever was closest at hand. There was fresh bread. He'd baked it just that morning, one of the few routines that still brought him a measure of peace. Butter churned from his neighbor's cream, sliced ham from the smokehouse, and a jar of Martha's preserved peaches that he'd been saving without really knowing why. He'd also brought a thermos of hot coffee, and after a moment's hesitation, a glass of cold milk from the ice house. Emma was exactly where he'd left her, wrapped in Martha's quilt, but now sitting on an old hay bale instead of cowering in the corner. She watched him approach with the careful attention of a wild creature that hadn't yet decided whether to trust the hand offering food. I wasn't sure what you'd like, Samuel said, setting the tray down on a nearby workbench, so I brought a bit of everything. Emma's eyes widened as she took in the spread. That's a lot of food. Growing children need proper meals, Samuel replied, though something in her amazed expression told him she hadn't seen proper meals in quite some time. Come, eat while it's still warm. Emma approached the food slowly, as if expecting it to disappear if she moved too quickly. When she finally took a piece of bread and bit into it, Samuel had to look away. The sound she made, a soft, involuntary moan of pleasure, spoke of profound hunger barely held in check. Easy now, Samuel said gently, as Emma began to eat faster. It's not going anywhere. Take your time. But Emma couldn't slow down. She ate like someone who'd learned that meals were uncertain things, not to be wasted or delayed. Samuel watched, his heart growing heavier with each desperate bite. This wasn't a child who'd missed lunch because she was playing too hard. This was a girl who'd been truly hungry, possibly for weeks. The milk might help wash that down, Samuel suggested, pushing the glass toward her. Emma paused in her eating long enough to drain half the glass in one go. A thin white mustache appeared on her upper lip, and for just a moment she looked like what she was, a 12-year-old child. But then the weariness crept back into her eyes, and the illusion faded. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger now that she'd gotten some food into her. "I can't remember the last time I had fresh bread." Samuel settled himself on another hay bale, far enough away to not seem threatening but close enough to talk comfortably. "Where have you been staying, Emma? Before you found my barn, I mean." Emma's hand stilled on the bread. "Different places, wherever I could find shelter." She glanced up at him, then away. "I'm good at being quiet. Most people don't notice me. But you've been on your own for a while." It wasn't a question, and Emma didn't treat it like one. He just nodded, taking another bite of ham. "How long?" Samuel asked gently. Emma was quiet for so long that Samuel thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. 3 months. Maybe a little more. 3 months. Samuel felt something cold settle in his stomach. A 12-year-old girl, surviving alone for 3 months. "Emma, what happened to your parents?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Emma set down her bread and pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders, though the barn was warm enough now. "They died," she said simply. "Car accident. On Route 30 just outside Lancaster." Samuel knew Route 30 well. It was the main highway that ran through Lancaster County, carrying tourists and locals alike through the heart of Amish country. It was also notorious for accidents, especially where it intersected with the smaller country roads. "I'm sorry for your loss," Samuel said, and meant it. "That must have been terrifying for you." Emma nodded, her eyes fixed on her hands. "I was in the car too. The doctors said it was a miracle I survived. But sometimes," she trailed off, shaking her head. "Sometimes you wonder if it really was a miracle," Samuel finished quietly. Emma looked up at him in surprise, as if she hadn't expected to be understood so completely. Samuel recognized the look. He'd seen it in his own mirror often enough. "The people who were supposed to take care of me after," Emma continued, They weren't good people, so I left." Samuel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "What do you mean, they weren't good people?" Emma shrank back slightly, and Samuel realized his voice had taken on an edge. He forced himself to speak more gently. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. But if someone hurt you, they didn't hurt me," Emma said quickly. "Not exact, but they didn't want me either. I was just a burden, something they had to deal with because the state said so." She picked at a loose thread on the quilt. "Foster parents get money for taking in kids, but some of them don't really want the kids, just the money." Samuel's hands clenched involuntarily. The thought of someone treating this girl, any child, as nothing more than a source of income made his chest burn with an anger he hadn't felt in years. "So you ran away." "I left," Emma corrected, lifting her chin slightly. "There's a difference." Samuel supposed there was. Running away implied fleeing from something good, leaving behind safety and love. What Emma had done sounded more like escaping. "Have you been in Lancaster County this whole time?" he asked. Emma nodded. "I know it sounds crazy, but I felt closer to them here. My parents, I mean. This is where we were going when..." She swallowed hard. "We were coming to see the Amish farms. Mom had always wanted to visit Pennsylvania Dutch country." Samuel's throat tightened. How many times had he seen families like Emma's over the years? Wide-eyed tourists with cameras and guidebooks. Parents pointing out the horse-drawn buggies to their children. Everyone marveling at the simple life the Amish had chosen. He'd always been polite but distant, answering questions when asked but never volunteering information. Now, looking at Emma, he realized that one of those families had been destroyed just miles from his front door. This girl might have driven past his farm with her parents, pressing her face to the car window and wondering what it would be like to live such a peaceful life. "They would have loved this place," Emma said, as if reading his thoughts. Mom always said she wanted to learn to make bread from scratch, like the Amish women do, and Dad would have loved talking to the farmers about the horses. Do you remember much about them? Samuel asked carefully. Emma's face brightened for the first time since he'd found her. Mom was beautiful. She had long dark hair, like mine, and she sang all the time. Even when she was just doing laundry or making dinner, she'd be humming some song or another. And Dad was so tall I always felt safe when he picked me up because it was like being on top of the world. Samuel smiled slightly, despite himself. They sound like good parents. The best, Emma said firmly. They adopted me when I was just a baby, said they chose me special. Out of all the babies in the world. Her voice grew smaller. I used to think that meant I was lucky. Now I wonder if maybe I'm cursed. Everyone who loves me dies. The words hit Samuel like a physical blow. How many times had he thought the same thing? First his parents, taken by illness when he was barely 20. Then Martha and Rebecca, gone in an instant when their buggy was struck by a drunk driver on a country road. Sometimes it felt like loving Samuel Yoder was a death sentence. You're not cursed, Emma, he said firmly. Sometimes terrible things happen, and there's no reason for it that we can understand. But that doesn't make you responsible for the pain. Emma looked at him with those two old eyes. Do you really believe that? Samuel hesitated. It was easier to offer comfort to a child than to believe it himself. I'm trying to, he said honestly. Something in his answer seemed to satisfy Emma more than false reassurance would have. She nodded and returned to her food, eating more slowly now, savoring each bite. Samuel, she said after a while. Yes, what happened to your family? I saw the way you looked when I mentioned my parents. And this quilt, it smells like lavender and sunshine, like a mother would smell. Samuel's breath caught. No one had asked him about Martha and Rebecca in years. The community knew his story, and outsiders rarely stayed long enough to care about his personal history. My wife, Martha, made that quilt, he said slowly. She loved to sew, said it helped her think. And my daughter, Rebecca, he paused, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest. She was 7 years old, full of questions and laughter and dreams about the future. What happened to them? Samuel was quiet for a long moment, watching the rain drip from the barn's eaves. Drunk driver, he said finally. 5 years ago, they were coming back from visiting Martha's sister in town when a man who'd had too much to drink ran a stop sign. Emma set down her glass of milk with trembling hands. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to. It's all right, Samuel said, though his voice was thick. It helps sometimes talking about them. Keeps them alive in here. He hit his chest, over his heart. Emma nodded solemnly. I talk to my parents sometimes. Out loud, I mean. People probably think I'm crazy, but it makes me feel less alone. You're not crazy, Samuel assured her. I do the same thing. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two damaged souls sharing the weight of their grief. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to clear, though neither of them seemed eager for it to end. There was something peaceful about this moment, sheltered from the world with nothing but honesty between them. Samuel? Emma said eventually. What's going to happen to me? It was the question Samuel had been dreading, because he didn't have a good answer. The right thing, the legal thing, would be to contact the authorities. Emma was a minor who'd run away from foster care. There would be paperwork and interviews, and eventually, she'd be placed back in the system that had failed her once already. But looking at her now, wrapped in Martha's quilt and finally looking like the child she was supposed to be, Samuel found himself reluctant to make that call. I don't know, he said honestly. What do you want to happen? Emma considered this seriously. I want to stay here, she said simply. I know that's probably not possible, and I know you don't really know me, but this is the first place I've felt safe in months. You're the first person who's been kind to me without wanting something in return. Samuel felt something shift inside his chest, like ice beginning to crack after a long winter. Emma, there are laws about children living with people who aren't their guardians. I couldn't legally. I know, Emma interrupted. I'm not asking you to break any laws. Could I maybe stay tonight? Just until the morning. I promise I won't be any trouble. Samuel looked at this girl who'd somehow wandered into his barn and his life carrying more pain than any 12-year-old should have to bear. He thought about his empty house, the silence that had become his constant companion, the way he'd been merely existing rather than living. One night, he said finally, but tomorrow we'll have to figure out what comes next. Emma's face lit up with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. Thank you, Samuel. You don't know what this means to me. But as Samuel watched Emma finish her meal, he realized that maybe he did know. For the first time in 5 years, his home would shelter someone who needed it. His kitchen would feed someone who was hungry. His presence would comfort someone who was afraid. Maybe Emma wasn't the only one who needed saving. There's a small room off the kitchen, Samuel said. It was meant to be a pantry, but Martha turned it into a sewing room. There's a daybed in there where you could sleep. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I haven't slept in a real bed since your parents died, Samuel finished gently. Emma nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Thank you for everything, for the food and the blanket, and for not treating me like I'm just a problem to be solved. Samuel stood and began gathering the empty dishes. As he did, he caught Emma watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Something between hope and fear, like she was afraid to believe this kindness was real. Come on then, Samuel said. Let's get you settled for the night. Tomorrow's worries can wait until tomorrow. As they left the barn together, Samuel carrying the tray and Emma wrapped in Martha's quilt, neither of them noticed the small piece of paper that had fallen from Emma's pocket during her meal. It lay on the barn floor, partially hidden under a piece of hay, bearing an address in Martha's familiar handwriting and a date from just over 12 years ago. Some secrets, it seemed, were about to reveal themselves, whether anyone was ready for them or not. Samuel woke before dawn, as he had every day for the past 30 years, but for the first time in 5 years, he didn't wake to silence. From somewhere in the house came the soft sound of movement, careful, quiet footsteps that spoke of someone trying not to disturb others. Emma. The events of the previous evening came flooding back as Samuel dressed in the pre-dawn darkness. The storm, the frightened girl in his barn, the way her eyes had lit up at the simple kindness of a warm meal. He'd given her Martha's old nightgown to sleep in, one of the few things he'd kept in the sewing room, and shown her where to find fresh water and towels. Now, as he made his way to the kitchen, Samuel found himself moving more quietly than usual, not wanting to startle his unexpected guests. He found Emma standing at the kitchen window, wrapped in Martha's quilt, watching the sun paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. She'd braided her long dark hair back from her face, and in the soft morning light, she looked even younger than her 12 years. Good morning, Samuel said softly. Emma turned, and he was surprised to see that she'd been crying, not the desperate sobs of fresh grief, but the quiet tears of someone who'd been carrying sorrow for too long. I'm sorry, she said quickly, wiping her face with the corner of the quilt. I didn't mean to wake you. I can be quieter. You didn't wake me, Samuel assured her. I always rise early. Habit of a lifetime. He studied her face with concern. Are you all right? Did you sleep poorly? Emma shook her head. I slept better than I have in months. It's just... She gestured toward the window. It's so beautiful here, peaceful. I was thinking about what my parents would have thought of this place. Samuel followed her gaze across his property. The storm had washed the world clean, and everything seemed to sparkle in the early morning light. His fields stretched out toward the horizon, broken by stands of oak and maple trees. In the distance, he could see smoke rising from the Miller family's chimney as they started their own day. They would have loved it, Samuel said with quiet certainty. Emma nodded, fresh tears threatening. They would have. Mom always said the best part of any day was watching the sunrise with people you love. Samuel felt that familiar tightness in his chest. Martha had said something similar once, standing in this very spot while Rebecca chased fireflies in the yard. The memory was so vivid, he could almost hear their laughter on the morning breeze. Would you like some breakfast? Samuel asked, pushing the painful memories aside. I was planning to make pancakes. Emma's eyes widened. You know how to make pancakes? Samuel almost smiled. Martha taught me, said a man should know how to cook more than just eggs and beans. He moved toward the stove, grateful for something to do with his hands. She used to make them every Sunday morning, with butter and honey from our own hives. You keep bees? Used to, Samuel corrected. Haven't tended them properly since. He trailed off, then forced himself to continue. Since Martha died, the hives are still there, but they've gone wild. Probably best to leave them be. Emma watched him gather ingredients from the pantry. Could you teach me to make pancakes, I mean? Samuel paused, a bag of flour in his hands. The request was so simple, so normal, but it hit him unexpectedly hard. When was the last time someone had asked him to teach them anything? When was the last time his knowledge had been wanted, valued? Yes, I suppose I could, he said. If you'd like to learn. Emma's face brightened, and for a moment, the sadness lifted from her features entirely. I'd like that very much. Mom was going to teach me to cook properly when I got older, but she shrugged, the gesture trying to be casual, but not quite succeeding. Samuel set the flour on the counter and looked at Emma, really looked at her. In the clear morning light, something nagged at the back of his mind. There was something familiar about her features, something that went beyond the general resemblance to every other dark-haired child he'd known over the years. Emma, he said carefully, what did you say your last name was again? Wilson, Emma replied quickly. Too quickly. Emma Wilson. Samuel nodded, though he noticed the way she avoided his eyes when she said it. He'd caught the hesitation yesterday too, but hadn't pressed. Now, watching her fidget with the edge of the quilt, he was certain she was lying. Not maliciously, more like someone trying to protect herself. All right then, Emma Wilson, Samuel said, deciding not to push for now. Let's make some pancakes. For the next hour, Samuel found himself remembering what it felt like to teach someone who genuinely wanted to learn. Emma listened carefully to his instructions, asked thoughtful questions, and only made the kinds of mistakes that came from inexperience rather than carelessness. The secret, Samuel explained as he showed her how to fold the batter without over-mixing, is to stop stirring when you still see lumps. Martha always said smooth batter makes tough pancakes. Emma nodded seriously as if he were sharing the secrets of the universe, rather than simple cooking tips. My adoptive mom, she wasn't much of a cook. We ate a lot of takeout. She paused in her stirring, but she always made my birthday cake from scratch, and some things were too important to buy ready-made. When is your birthday? Samuel asked. March 15th. Emma replied without hesitation. This, at least, sounded like the truth. Samuel froze, the ladle halfway to the griddle. March 15th. He knew that date, knew it so well it was carved into his heart alongside every other important moment of his life. March 15th was Rebecca's birthday. Samuel? Emma's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Samuel shook himself back to the present. Sorry, that's a meaningful date for me too. My daughter was born on March 15th. Emma's expression softened. Oh, I'm sorry. That must make it hard having a stranger share her birthday. No, Samuel said quickly, surprised to find he meant it. No, it's actually nice. Like a gift in a way. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the griddle heating up and filling the kitchen with the promise of a good breakfast. But Samuel's mind was racing. March 15th, dark hair. Those familiar features that had been nagging at him. As Emma flipped her first pancake, perfectly golden and round, Samuel found himself studying her profile again. The shape of her nose, the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, even the way she held her shoulders. Emma, Samuel said slowly, I know this might sound strange, but have you ever been to Lancaster County before? Before these past few months, I mean. Emma shook her head. No, never. Like I said yesterday, we were coming here for the first time. She gestured vaguely, unable to finish the sentence. Samuel nodded, but something wasn't adding up. The coincidences were piling up. The birthday, the familiar features, the way she'd seemed drawn to his property specifically. And there was something else, something that had been bothering him since he'd first seen her in the barn. Emma, you said your parents adopted you as a baby. Do you know anything about your birth parents? Emma's hand stilled on the spatula. Why would you ask that? Samuel could hear the defensiveness in her voice, but he pressed on gently. Just curious. Sometimes adoptive families know details about the biological parents. Medical history, that sort of thing. I don't know anything, Emma said firmly, and I don't want to know. The Wilsons were my real parents. Blood doesn't make a family, love does. The conviction in her voice reminded Samuel so strongly of Martha that his breath caught. Martha had said almost exactly those words once, during one of their quiet conversations about children and family and the different ways people came to belong to each other. You're absolutely right, Samuel said softly. Love is what makes a family. They finished cooking in silence, but Samuel's mind wouldn't rest. Too many coincidences, too many familiar echoes. As they sat down to eat their pancakes, Emma, making soft sounds of appreciation at the taste. Samuel found himself making a decision. Emma, I need to go into town today. Some errands I can't put off any longer. This was partly true. He did need supplies, and there were community obligations he'd been neglecting. Would you like to come with me? Emma looked up, syrup on her chin and hope in her eyes. You'd want me to come with you and enjoy the company, Samuel said, and realized he meant it. Besides, we should probably get you some clothes that fit properly. And shoes. Emma looked down at her bare feet, suddenly self-conscious. I had shoes, but they got too small. I left them behind when she gestured vaguely. When you left your foster home, Samuel finished. Emma nodded. Is it expensive? Buying clothes, I mean. I don't have any money, but maybe I could work for you to pay it back. I'm good at cleaning, and I can learn other things. Samuel's heart clenched at the anxiety in her voice. Don't worry about money, child. Everyone needs proper clothing. But as they prepared to leave for town, Samuel had ulterior motives beyond shopping. There were questions that needed answers, and sometimes the only way to find the truth was to start asking the right people the right questions. He had a feeling that Emma's story, the real story, was about to become much more complicated. An hour later, as Samuel's buggy rolled down the familiar country roads toward Lancaster, Emma sat beside him, wrapped in one of Martha's old cloaks, her eyes wide as she took in the passing scenery. She pointed out landmarks and asked questions about the Amish way of life. But Samuel found himself only half listening. His mind was churning with possibilities, each one more unlikely than the last. But as they approached the town, Samuel made a silent promise to himself and to the memory of his wife and daughter. If there was even the smallest chance that Emma was more than just a lost child who'd wandered into his barn, he was going to find out the truth. No matter how much it might hurt, no matter how it might change everything, some answers, Samuel realized, were worth the risk of having your heart broken all over again. As the buggy wheels turned steadily toward town, carrying them toward answers neither of them was prepared for, Emma continued to chatter about the beautiful morning and how grateful she was for Samuel's kindness. She had no idea that by sunset, everything she thought she knew about her life would be turned upside down, and Samuel, despite his growing suspicions, couldn't have imagined how completely this one lost girl would transform his understanding of his own past. The truth, it seemed, had been waiting 12 years to finally come home. The first stop in Lancaster was Miller's General Store, where Samuel had been buying supplies for over 20 years. The proprietor, English but respectful of the Amish community, greeted Samuel with surprise. It had been months since he'd come to town with anyone, let alone a child. Emma stayed close to Samuel's side as they selected simple clothing, plain dresses, undergarments, a warm coat, and sturdy shoes. She touched everything with wonder, as if she'd never been shopping before, and Samuel realized that perhaps she hadn't. not for necessities anyway. Foster children often made do with donated clothes and hand-me-downs. "This is too much," Emma whispered, as Samuel added a second dress to their pile. "I only need one of everything." "Everyone needs more than one dress," Samuel replied firmly. "What happens when you need to wash the one you're wearing?" Emma's eyes filled with tears at his practical kindness, and Samuel had to look away before his own emotions overwhelmed him. After the clothing store, Samuel made an excuse about needing to visit the post office, leaving Emma to change into her new clothes in the store's small fitting room. But instead of the post office, he walked 3 blocks to a small office building he'd never entered before. The sign read, "Lancaster County Department of Social Services." Samuel's hands shook as he opened the door. Inside, a middle-aged woman sat behind a desk, covered with manila folders and coffee-stained papers. She looked up as he entered, her expression shifting from bored bureaucratic politeness to genuine interest when she saw his Amish clothing. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I hope so," Samuel said, removing his hat. "My name is Samuel Yoder. I'm looking for information about a child who might be in the foster care system, a girl named Emma." The woman, her nameplate read, Janet Morrison, leaned forward. "Are you a relative?" "I can't give out information about minors unless—" "No," Samuel interrupted. "I'm not a relative. At least I don't think I am." He took a deep breath. "This girl showed up on my property yesterday. She says she ran away from foster care, and I'm trying to help her. But there are some coincidences that are troubling me." Janet's expression sharpened. "What kind of coincidences?" Samuel felt foolish trying to explain his suspicions, but he forced himself to continue. "She was born on March 15th. She has dark hair and certain facial features that remind me of my late wife. And there's something about her that feels familiar, like I should know her." Janet was quiet for a long moment, studying Samuel's face. "Mr. Yoder, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Did you and your wife ever place a child for adoption?" Samuel's heart stopped. "No, Martha and we only had one child, Rebecca. She died 5 years ago in a buggy accident." "I see." Janet made a note on a pad of paper. "And when was Rebecca born?" "March 15th, 2010. Samuel replied automatically, then froze as the implications hit him. "Wait, are you suggesting—" Janet held up a hand. "I'm not suggesting anything yet, but I need to check something." She turned to her computer, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Can you tell me your wife's full name?" "Martha Elizabeth Yoder. Her maiden name was Stoltzfors." More typing. Janet's eyebrows rose slightly as she read whatever was on her screen. "Mr. Yoder, I'm going to ask you to sit down." Samuel's legs suddenly felt weak. He sank into the plastic chair across from Janet's desk, his mind racing with possibilities he didn't dare voice. 12 years ago, Janet said carefully, a baby girl was brought to our office. She'd been found abandoned at Lancaster General Hospital, with nothing but a note and a small blanket. The note was signed Stoltzfus, and it said that the baby's name was Emma, that she was born on March 15th, and that she needed to be placed with a good family because her birth mother couldn't care for her. Samuel's world tilted on its axis. "Emma Stoltzfus," he whispered. "The baby was placed with David and Sarah Wilson, a couple who'd been trying to adopt for years. They moved to Ohio shortly afterward. David got a job there. The adoption was finalized 6 months later." "But that's impossible," Samuel said, his voice barely audible. "Martha never—" "She would have told me if she'd been pregnant again. We were married. We wanted more children." Janet leaned forward, her expression gentle but serious. "Mr. Yoder, is it possible that your wife had a sister or a cousin, someone else with the maiden name Stoltzfus, who might have given birth around that time?" Samuel's mind was spinning. Martha had been an only child, but the Stoltzfus family was large, spread across several states. There were dozens of cousins, aunts, second cousins. "I don't know," he admitted. "The Stoltzfus family tree is complicated. But why would anyone sign Martha's name? Maybe it wasn't Martha's name. Janet said quietly. Maybe it was someone else with the initial M. Someone who shared the Stoltzfus name. Samuel tried to think, tried to remember conversations about distant relatives, but his mind kept circling back to one impossible thought. What if Emma wasn't just some random child who'd wandered into his barn? What if she was family? Mr. Yoder, Janet continued, there's something else. The Wilsons, Emma's adoptive parents. They died 3 months ago in a car accident just outside Lancaster. Emma was in the car but survived. She was placed in emergency foster care, but she ran away, Samuel finished. 3 days after placement. We've been looking for her ever since. Janet's expression was grave. Mr. Yoder, if this child is with you now, I need to know. She's been missing for months, and there are people who are very worried about her. Samuel's mind raced. Emma was officially a missing child. By sheltering her, he'd technically been harboring a runaway, but the thought of turning her over to the system that had already failed her once made his stomach clench. What would happen to her? He asked. If I knew where she was? That would depend on several factors, Janet said carefully. Her age, her wishes, whether any relatives could be located. She paused meaningfully, whether any suitable family members might be willing to provide care. The implications hung in the air between them. Samuel stared at his hands, trying to process everything he'd learned. Emma might be family, distant family, but family nonetheless. She was alone in the world, just as he was. And she'd somehow found her way to his door. I need to ask you something, Samuel said finally. If someone were to come forward, a family member, what would the process be for them to become Emma's guardian? Janet's expression softened. There would be background checks, home visits, interviews. The court would want to ensure that any placement was in Emma's best interests. But family members are always given priority consideration. Samuel nodded slowly, and if this family member had previously lost a child, if there were questions about their ability to provide proper care, the death of a child isn't automatically disqualifying. Janet said gently. The court would look at the circumstances, the person's current stability, their support system. She leaned forward. Mr. Yoder, are you telling me you think Emma might be your relative? I don't know, Samuel said honestly, but I think I need to find out. Janet made more notes on her pad. If you're serious about this, I can help you research the family connections. But first, I need to know, is Emma safe? Is she being cared for? Samuel met her eyes. Yes, she's safe. Good. Janet pulled out a business card and handed it to him. Take some time to think about this. If you decide you want to pursue guardianship, call me. In the meantime, make sure Emma knows she's not in trouble. A lot of kids in her situation think they'll be punished for running away. Samuel pocketed the card and stood to leave. At the door, he turned back. Janet, the note that was left with Emma as a baby. Do you still have it? We keep all documentation. Why? Could I see it? The handwriting, I mean. I'd know Martha's handwriting anywhere. Janet hesitated, then nodded. Come back tomorrow. I'll have the file pulled. Samuel walked back to the general store in a daze, his mind churning with questions and possibilities. When he found Emma, she was standing in front of a mirror, wearing her new blue dress and looking more like a normal 12-year-old girl than the frightened waif he'd found in his barn. Samuel, she said, turning with a bright smile. Look, it fits perfectly. How did you know my size? Samuel managed to smile in return, though his heart was pounding. Lucky guess. As they loaded their purchases into the buggy, Emma chattered happily about the town, the people they'd seen, how different everything was from Ohio. Samuel listened with half his attention, the other half focused on studying her features with new eyes. The shape of her nose could be from the Stoltzfus side. Her stubborn chin reminded him of his own mother, and those eyes he'd thought they looked familiar because they held the same pain as his own. but now he wondered if there was another reason. Samuel, Emma's voice broke through his thoughts. You've been quiet since we left the store. Are you all right? Just thinking, Samuel said, guiding the horse down the familiar road toward home. About what? Samuel glanced at her, this girl who might be his family, sitting beside him in Martha's old cloak. About how sometimes the things we're looking for find us instead. Emma smiled, not understanding the deeper meaning but content with the cryptic answer. She settled back against the buggy seat, watching the countryside roll by. Neither of them spoke for the rest of the journey home, but both were lost in thought. Emma was thinking about how strange and wonderful it was to have someone care about her comfort, to buy her clothes and make her pancakes and treat her like she mattered. Samuel was thinking about the note signed M. Stoltzfus, and wondering if tomorrow would bring answers or just more questions. But one thing was becoming clear. Whatever the truth about Emma's parentage, he wasn't ready to let her go. She'd brought something back to his life that he'd thought was gone forever, hope, and sometimes Samuel was beginning to realize hope was worth taking risks for. As they pulled into his yard, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the farm, Samuel made a decision. Tomorrow he would go back to see Janet Morrison. Tomorrow he would look at that note and try to piece together the mystery of Emma's origin. But tonight, he would simply enjoy having someone to cook dinner for, someone to share the evening meal with, someone who made his empty house feel like a home again. The truth could wait one more day. Samuel barely slept that night. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft sounds of someone else living in his house. The creak of floorboards as Emma moved around the sewing room, the whisper of fabric as she settled into the daybed, the gentle rhythm of another person's breathing. It was the first time in 5 years that his home had held life beyond his own solitary existence, and the sound was both comforting and terrifying. Every time he closed his eyes, Samuel's mind raced with possibilities. Emma Stoltzfus, Martha's maiden name, but also the name of dozens of other women in Lancaster County, the coincidence of the birthday, the familiar features that had nagged at him from the moment he'd first seen Emma. Clearly, as dawn approached, Samuel found himself thinking about Martha's family tree, trying to remember conversations about distant cousins and relatives scattered across Pennsylvania and Ohio. The Stoltzfus family was large and interconnected in the way of Amish communities, with branches that stretched back generations and sideways across state lines. Had there been a cousin named Mary, or maybe Margaret, someone who might have found herself in trouble and used Martha's name to protect her own reputation? But even as Samuel tried to rationalize the coincidences, a deeper part of him whispered possibilities he didn't dare voice, even to himself. When he finally gave up on sleep and made his way to the kitchen to start the morning chores, he found Emma already there, dressed in her new blue dress, attempting to make coffee with the concentration of someone trying to repay kindness in the only way she knew how. "Good morning," Samuel said softly. Not wanting to startle her, Emma turned with a guilty expression. "I'm sorry. I was trying to make coffee for you, but I'm not sure I did it right. Mom always made it, and then after, well, foster homes don't usually let kids near the stove." Samuel examined her handiwork. The coffee was stronger than he usually made it, but perfectly drinkable. "It's fine," he assured her. "Thank you for thinking of it." Emma beamed at the praise, and Samuel felt that now familiar tightness in his chest. When was the last time such a simple compliment had meant so much to someone? "Samuel," Emma said as they sat down with their coffee, "yesterday when we were in town you seemed different. Worried, maybe. Did I do something wrong?" Samuel studied her face over his coffee cup. She was perceptive, this girl, able to read moods and changes in atmosphere. It was probably a survival skill she'd developed during her months on her own. "No, Emma, you did nothing wrong." Samuel paused, weighing his words carefully. "But I did learn some things yesterday that I need to understand better." Emma's expression grew wary. "What kind of things?" "Things about your adoption, about the circumstances of your birth." Samuel set down his coffee cup. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. When you told me your last name was Wilson, were you telling the truth?" Emma's face went pale. For a long moment, she said nothing, just stared into her coffee as if it might provide answers. She didn't want to give. "No," she whispered finally. "Wilson was my adoptive parents' name, but they're gone now, so I figured it didn't matter anymore." "What was your name before the adoption?" "I don't know," Emma said, and the pain in her voice was genuine. "The Wilsons told me I was abandoned as a baby. They said I didn't have a name, that they got to choose it for me." She looked up at Samuel with those two old eyes. "They said whoever left me didn't care enough to even give me a proper name." Samuel's heart broke a little more. "Emma, that's not true. You had a name from the beginning. The person who left you at the hospital, they called you Emma." Emma's head snapped up. "How do you know that?" Samuel took a deep breath. There was no gentle way to navigate this conversation, because yesterday, while you were changing clothes, I went to the Department of Social Services. I asked about you. Emma's face crumpled. "You're going to send me back," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You found out I was officially missing, and now you're going to turn me in." "No," Samuel said firmly. "Emma, look at me." When she raised her tear-filled eyes to his, he continued, "I'm not going to send you anywhere you don't want to go, but I needed to understand your situation, and I needed to know if—" He paused, struggling with how to explain his suspicions without raising false hopes. "If what?" Samuel made a decision. Emma deserved the truth, even if it was complicated. "Emma, the note that was left with you when you were a baby, it was signed with the name Im Stoltzfus." Emma frowned. "What does that mean?" "Stoltzfus was my wife's maiden name. It's also the name of a large Amish family in this area." Samuel leaned forward. "Emma, there's a possibility, just a possibility, that whoever left you at the hospital was related to my late wife, which would make you family." Emma stared at him for a long moment, processing this information. "Family," she repeated slowly. "You think I might be related to you?" "I don't know," Samuel said honestly, "but I intend to find out. Today I'm going back to town to look at the original note. I'll know if it's Martha's handwriting." Emma was quiet for so long that Samuel began to worry he'd overwhelmed her. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. "What if it is? What if I am related to you somehow?" Samuel reached across the table and gently covered her small hand with his larger one. "Then you'd have a home here if you wanted it. You'd have family who wanted you, not because the state pays them to take you in, but because you belong here." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "And what if I'm not? What if it's just a coincidence?" Samuel squeezed her hand gently. "Then you'd still have a home here if you wanted it. You'd still have someone who cares about you." Emma broke down then, sobbing with the kind of desperate relief that came from months of carrying fear and uncertainty alone. Samuel moved around the table and awkwardly patted her shoulder, unused to comforting crying children but instinctively knowing she needed the contact. "I'm sorry," Emma gasped, between sobs. I've been so scared, and so tired of being alone. I never hoped that someone might actually want me." "Oh, child," Samuel murmured, his own voice thick with emotion. "Of course someone wants you. You're bright and kind and brave. Any family would be lucky to have you." They sat together in the morning light, two broken people finding healing in unexpected connection. Outside, Samuel could hear his neighbors beginning their daily routines, but inside his kitchen the world had narrowed to just the two of them and the possibility of belonging. Eventually Emma's tears subsided, and she pulled back, embarrassed by her emotional display. "I'm sorry for crying all over you. Don't apologize for having feelings," Samuel said. "They're proof that you're alive, that you care about things. That's nothing to be sorry for." Emma nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "Samuel, when you go to town today, could I come with you? I know it might be hard to see the note, but I want to know the truth too. Whatever it is." Samuel considered this. It would be easier to handle whatever emotions came up if he was alone, but Emma had a right to be there. This was her story as much as his. "All right," he said. "We'll go together." 3 hours later, Samuel and Emma sat in Janet Morrison's office. A manila folder open on the desk between them. Inside the folder was a single piece of paper, yellowed with age, but still clearly legible. The note was brief. "This is Emma, born March 15. Please find her a good family. I cannot care for her. Bamak Stoltzfears." Samuel stared at the handwriting for a long time, his heart pounding. Next to him, Emma held her breath. "It's not Martha's," Samuel said finally, and he couldn't tell if the emotion in his voice was relief or disappointment. Janet leaned forward. "You're certain?" "Yes." Martha's handwriting was more careful, more precise. "This is looser, less educated, maybe." Samuel studied the note again. "But it's definitely someone who knew how to write, not a child." Emma let out a shaky breath. "So we're not directly related to my wife," Samuel confirmed. "But that doesn't mean you're not family in other ways." Janet had been watching this exchange with professional interest. "Mr. Yoder, even if the note wasn't written by your wife, the Stoltzfus connection is still significant. If you're serious about pursuing guardianship, we could research the family tree, try to establish a connection." Samuel looked at Emma, who was staring at the note with an unreadable expression. "What do you think, Emma? Do you want to know who M. Stoltzfus was?" Emma was quiet for a moment. "I used to think about my birth mother all the time," she said slowly, "especially when things were hard with the Wilsons or in foster care. I'd imagine she was some tragic figure who gave me up because she had no choice, who thought about me every day and regretted leaving me. And now," Samuel prompted gently. "Now I think maybe it doesn't matter who she was," Emma said, looking up at him. "Maybe what matters is who wants me now." Samuel felt something shift in his chest, like ice finally breaking after a long winter. "Emma, regardless of what the paperwork says, regardless of whether we share any blood, would you like to stay with me? Permanently, I mean. As family." Emma's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Really? You'd want that? Even though I'm not really your granddaughter or niece or anything? You're Emma," Samuel said simply. "That's all you need to be." Emma launched herself around the desk and into Samuel's arms, hugging him with the fierce intensity of someone who'd finally found her place in the world. Samuel held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair and marveling at how right this felt. Over Emma's head, he met Janet's eyes. She was smiling, the kind of smile that said she'd seen enough broken families to recognize when something was being put back together. "I'll start the paperwork," Janet said quietly. "It'll take some time and there will be home visits and interviews, but I think we can make this work." As they left the office an hour later, Emma's hand tucked securely in Samuel's. Both of them were quieter than usual. There was still paperwork to navigate, still official processes to complete, but the hard part was over. They'd chosen each other. "Samuel," Emma said as they climbed into the buggy. "Yes? Do you think your wife and daughter would have liked me?" Samuel's throat tightened. "Oh, Emma, they would have loved you. Martha always said there was room in our family for anyone who needed a home. And Rebecca," he paused, remembering his daughter's generous heart. "Rebecca would have been so excited to have a sister." Emma smiled, and for the first time since Samuel had known her, it was a smile without shadows. "I would have liked having a sister too." As they drove home through the Pennsylvania countryside, the late afternoon sun painting everything in golden light, Samuel felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years. Content, not the desperate happiness of trying to recapture the past, but the quiet satisfaction of building something new. Emma chatted about their day, about the kindness of Janet Morrison, about her excitement at the prospect of staying permanently. Samuel listened with half his attention, the other half focused on the simple miracle of not being alone anymore. They still had challenges ahead, legal processes, community acceptance, the day-to-day reality of learning to be a family. But for now, it was enough to know they'd found each other. Sometimes, Samuel reflected, the family you choose is just as strong as the family you're born into. Sometimes it's even stronger. As the buggy turned into his driveway, Samuel realized he was coming home to a house that would never be empty again. And for the first time in 5 years, that felt like the greatest blessing he could have asked for. The morning of Emma's 13th birthday dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crisp March air that promised spring was finally ready to push winter aside. Samuel woke early, as always, but this time he woke to the sound of Emma moving around in the kitchen below, humming softly to herself as she prepared breakfast. It had become their routine over the past month. Emma would start the coffee and set the table while Samuel tended to the morning chores in the barn. They'd eat breakfast together, plan their day, and tackle whatever needed doing around the farm. It was a simple rhythm, but it filled the spaces in both their lives that had been empty for too long. Samuel dressed quickly and made his way downstairs, pausing in the doorway of the kitchen to watch Emma work. She'd grown in the past 6 months, not just physically, though she was taller and had filled out some thanks to regular meals and the security of knowing where her next meal was coming from. She'd grown in confidence, in the easy way she moved through the house that was now legally and officially her home too. The guardianship papers had been finalized just 2 weeks ago, with Janet Morrison noting in her final report that she'd never seen a placement work out so naturally or successfully. Emma Yoder, she'd chosen to take Samuel's name, saying it felt right, was thriving. "Good morning, Dad," Emma said without turning around, and Samuel's heart still skipped a beat every time she called him that. It had started tentatively, a few months ago, when Emma had asked shyly if she could try calling him something other than Samuel. The word had felt strange on both their tongues at first, but now it seemed as natural as breathing. "Good morning, daughter," Samuel replied, the endearment still new enough to bring a smile to both their faces. "You're up early for a birthday, girl." Emma turned with a grin, flour dusting her apron. "I wanted to make pancakes for my birthday breakfast, and I wanted to have everything ready before—" She trailed off, looking suddenly uncertain. "Before what?" Samuel asked gently. Emma bit her lip, the way she still did when she was nervous about something. "Before the guests arrive. I mean, if that's still okay, if you haven't changed your mind." Samuel's heart clenched with understanding. Even after 6 months of security, Emma still sometimes feared that good things would be taken away from her. It was a legacy of too many years of uncertainty, and Samuel knew it would take time to fully heal. "Emma," he said, moving to put his hands on her shoulders, "the Miller family is coming for your birthday dinner, just like we planned. All of them, Jacob and Sarah, and their 3 children. And Mrs. Byler is bringing that chocolate cake she promised. And Bishop Eshed, he might stop by with his wife if their grandson's cold is better." Emma's face lit up. "Really? They're all really coming? They're all really coming?" Samuel confirmed. "Half the community has been asking me what they can bring." "I think you've made quite an impression on people." It was true. Emma's integration into the Amish community had surprised everyone, including Samuel. She'd embraced the simple lifestyle with enthusiasm, learning to garden and preserve food, to sew and mend clothes, to help with barn raisings and community events. She'd even started attending the German language classes that Bishop Esch held for the children, saying she wanted to understand the prayers and hymns properly. But more than that, Emma had brought something to the community that they hadn't realized they were missing: the joy of watching someone discover the beauty in simplicity, the excitement of someone who chose their way of life, rather than simply being born into it. "I still can't believe they want to celebrate with me," Emma said, returning to her pancake batter. "I'm not even really Amish." "You're as Amish as you choose to be," Samuel said firmly. "And your family. Our community takes care of family." Emma smiled, but Samuel could see something else in her expression, a shadow of sadness that appeared every year around this time. "Emma," Samuel said gently, "are you thinking about your adoptive parents today?" Emma nodded, not trusting her voice for a moment. "I always do on my birthday. The Wilsons used to make such a big deal about it. They'd decorate the whole house and invite all their friends over." She paused, stirring the batter more vigorously than necessary. I know they weren't perfect, and things got hard toward the end when money was tight, but they did love me in their own way. Samuel moved to stand beside her, not touching but close enough to offer comfort. It's okay to miss them, Emma. Loving new people doesn't mean you have to stop loving the people who came before. Emma looked up at him, with tear-bright eyes. Is that how you feel about Martha and Rebecca? When you care about me, does it feel like you're betraying them? It was a question Emma had asked before, in different ways, and Samuel always answered it honestly. No, sweetheart, loving you doesn't diminish what I felt for that. If anything, it helps me understand how big love can be. Martha always said the heart wasn't like a pie, where giving someone a piece meant less for everyone else. She said it was more like a candle. You can light other candles from it without making the first flame any smaller. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a small streak of flour on her cheek. I wish I could have met her, and Rebecca. I wish you could have too, Samuel said softly. But I think, maybe you did know Rebecca, in a way. Emma frowned. What do you mean? Samuel had been thinking about this for months, ever since Emma had settled into their home and their routine. You were born on the same day, just 5 years apart. You both had the same generous heart, the same way of seeing the good in people. Sometimes when you laugh or when you're concentrating really hard on something, you get this little crease between your eyebrows that Rebecca used to get. Really. And yesterday when you spent 2 hours helping Miss Miller with her new baby so she could rest. That's exactly the kind of thing Rebecca would have done. She never could stand to see someone struggling without offering to help. Emma smiled through her tears. Do you think she would have liked me? If we'd been able to meet— Oh, Emma, Samuel said, pulling her into a hug that smelled of pancake batter and hope. She would have adored you. She always wanted a sister, and you would have been exactly the kind of sister she would have chosen. They held each other for a moment, two people who'd found family in loss and chosen love over loneliness. When Emma pulled back, her eyes were clear again, the shadow of sadness replaced by something brighter. Okay, she said, turning back to the stove with renewed energy. Enough crying on my birthday. We have pancakes to make and a party to get ready for. Samuel smiled, watching her pour the first pancake onto the griddle, with the confidence of someone who'd mastered the art over months of practice. What can I do to help? You can tell me about the surprise, Emma said without looking up from the stove. What surprise? Samuel asked innocently. Emma shot him a look. Dad, I've lived with you for 6 months. I know when you're up to something. You've been sneaking around the barn for weeks, and yesterday I saw you hiding something in the root cellar. Samuel tried to look offended. I have no idea what you're talking about. Emma flipped the pancake with practiced ease. Well, whatever it is, I'm sure I'll love it. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence. Emma too excited about her party to focus much on food, and Samuel too nervous about his surprise to do much more than push pancakes around his plate. Finally, as Emma was clearing the dishes, Samuel stood up. Emma, before the others arrive, there's something I'd like to show you. Emma's eyes lit up. The surprise, part of it. Samuel hesitated, suddenly uncertain. What if she didn't like what he'd done? What if it was too much, too presumptuous? But first, I want to tell you something. Emma set down the dishes and gave him her full attention. 6 months ago, Samuel began, when you first came to my barn in that storm, I thought my life was over. Oh, I was still breathing, still going through the motions of living, but I wasn't really alive. I was just existing. Emma nodded, understanding in her eyes. But you changed that, Samuel continued. You brought laughter back into this house. You brought purpose back to my days. You reminded me that caring about someone, even when it scares you, is what makes life worth living. Emma's eyes filled with tears again. Dad, let me finish, Samuel said gently. What I'm trying to say is that you saved me, Emma. Just as much as I might have saved you. We saved each other. Emma threw her arms around him then, hugging him with all the fierce love of a daughter who'd chosen her father just as much as he'd chosen her. "Now," Samuel said when they separated, "are you ready for your surprise?" Emma nodded eagerly, and Samuel led her outside, across the yard toward the small family cemetery under the oak trees. Emma had visited Martha and Rebecca's graves many times over the past month, sometimes alone and sometimes with Samuel, always leaving small wildflowers or particularly pretty stones. But as they approached the cemetery, Emma gasped. Next to Martha and Rebecca's headstones was a new addition, a small garden plot with raised beds and a wooden bench, all clearly built with loving care. "Dad," Emma whispered, "it's beautiful." "It's yours," Samuel said. "A place for you to remember your adoptive parents if you'd like. I thought maybe you could plant some flowers, daisies, maybe since you mentioned once that your mother loved daisies." Emma was crying openly now, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "You did this for me. For them. I did it for all of us," Samuel said. "I thought it might be nice to have a place where all our loved ones could be remembered together, where our family, all of our family, could rest in peace." Emma walked slowly around the garden, running her hands along the wooden borders, testing the rich soil Samuel had prepared. When she reached the bench, she found a small metal plaque embedded in the back, in memory of David and Sarah Wilson, who loved Emma and gave her a home when she needed one most. "Oh, Dad," Emma sobbed, sinking onto the bench. "This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me." Samuel sat beside her, his own eyes damp. "There's more." Emma looked at him in amazement. "More?" Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package. "This was your real surprise. The garden was, well, I wanted you to have a place to think about all the people who've loved you." Emma unwrapped the package with trembling hands. Inside was a simple locket, tarnished with age but polished to a soft glow. When she opened it, she found two small photographs, one of a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes, the other of a little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed grin. "That's Martha and Rebecca," Samuel said softly. I thought you might like to carry them with you, so you'd always know you're part of their story too." Emma couldn't speak. She just stared at the photographs, memorizing every detail of the faces of the family members she'd never met, but had somehow become connected to through love and choice and the strange ways that broken people find each other. "There's an inscription on the back," Samuel said. Emma turned the locket over and read the words Samuel had asked the jeweler to engrave. "Emma Yoder, beloved daughter, chosen family, March 15, 2017. "It's perfect," Emma whispered. "Everything is perfect." They sat together on the bench, surrounded by the graves of people they'd loved and lost, but no longer feeling haunted by that loss. Instead, they felt surrounded by love. The love of those who'd gone before, the love they'd found in each other, and the love of the community that had welcomed Emma as one of their own. "Dad?" Emma said after a while. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think we'll always be this happy?" Samuel considered the question seriously. "I think we'll have hard days," he said honestly. "Everyone does, but I think we'll face them together, and that makes all the difference." Emma nodded, closing the locket carefully and fastening it around her neck. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, Emma, more than I ever thought I could love anything again." As if summoned by their words, the sound of voices drifted across the yard from the direction of the road. The Miller family was arriving, their buggy loaded with food and children, and the comfortable chaos of a family coming to celebrate. "Are you ready for your party?" Samuel asked, standing and offering Emma his hand. Emma stood beside him, the locket warm against her chest, her new garden spread before her, and her chosen family waiting to celebrate another year of her life. For the first time since her adoptive parents died, Emma felt truly, completely at peace. "I'm ready," she said, taking Samuel's hand. "Let's go home." As they walked back toward the house together, Emma carrying flowers she wanted to plant in her new garden, and Samuel carrying the joy of watching his daughter discover she was loved. Both of them understood something that had taken months to learn. Home wasn't just a place where you live. It wasn't just a house, or a farm, or a community, though all of those things mattered. Home was where love decided to stay, where broken people chose to heal together, where a storm-soaked girl and a grieving man discovered that sometimes the family you need finds you in the most unexpected way, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, it decides to stay forever. Behind them, in the small cemetery under the oak trees, the wind stirred through the branches, carrying with it the whispered blessings of those who'd loved them first, and the promise of all the love still to come. The storm that had brought Emma to Samuel's barn was long over, but the rainbow it had left behind would last for the rest of their lives.